Malaysians can't afford to be happy.
Money can't buy happiness, but it can remove unhappiness. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Hardish. And this is the Economy Rice Podcast.
It's where we focus on things related to the economy and things that are related to your rice bowl.
Hey, Aaron. So, did you hear about this global life-work balance index that came out a couple of weeks ago?
I did, but maybe you can tell us a bit more about it.
So, very funny, right? There was this index that came out. So it's called the Global Life-Work Balance Index. I usually use the term work-life, but okay, they said Life-Work Balance Index.
Right.
It was put up by this company called Remote, which, to be honest, I never heard of before.
Okay.
Right? I don't know if you have heard of Remote before. But generally, what was this index all about? It reviewed the 60 highest GDP countries with highest GDPs, right? The top 60, to see which one had the best work-life balance. And Malaysia placed 59. So basically second last, right?
Well, at least we're not the last, right?
Yeah. So you want to guess who is the last?
Kazakhstan?
No, geographically also not so close. It was Nigeria.
Okay.
Right? So
right.
it was Nigeria, right?
But
so,
this is the top 60, right? Not like
top 60.
192.
Yeah. Top 60,
okay.
right? Top 60. They only took top 60 GDP, right?
Right.
So obviously, as you can imagine, being Malaysians,
Right.
everyone had something to say about this,
Okay.
right? How is it that we are second last and we are just one step better than Nigeria?
Right.
Which in itself, I think, speaks of some sort of prejudice, right? Actually, when you look at something like this, I always wonder, what are you actually trying to measure, right? When you say work-life balance. And I think that if you really sort of drill down into it, you're really sort of trying to get an idea of people's happiness, or what I would like to think of as their dignity, right?
Right.
Maybe you can look at it as economic dignity. You work, but the reason you work is because you need a living, right? That is the basic idea.
Yes.
But if you cannot have a good living, then the thing is sort of out of sync, and so therefore you have these conversations about why you were struggling so much, and what is the point of it, right?
So let me rephrase it. We don't just work to live, but work to have a life.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I mean, that should be the general idea, right?
Yes.
So another way of thinking about it is basically it's happiness or well-being, right? So the reason I bring this up is because there is actually a World Happiness Report, and this World Happiness Report is produced by Gallup. So Gallup is a very famous polling. I think they are sort of a polling data, right?
Yeah,
they do
a bit
a lot
like
of polls.
Nielsen, right?
Yeah, right. And the Oxford Wellbeing Research Centre, which is part of Oxford University,
Okay.
and also the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, right?
Right.
So they have this thing called the World Happiness Report. And you want to guess where Malaysia places on that report?
I have no idea, man.
Okay, coincidentally, also 59,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But this is 59 out of 143 countries.
Right.
So World Happiness Report, they look at the entire list of countries, because it's also based on UN's data as well, right? And if you wanted to take this further, remember on the first report that we're talking about that was put out by Remote, Malaysia was 59, number 60 was Nigeria, right?
Right.
Who do you think was number 60 on the World Happiness Report, the one that put out by Gallup and Oxford?
I will have to guess Thailand or Indonesia?
Okay, actually it was China.
China?
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
So China is lower than Malaysia on the World Happiness Report.
Okay, I mean, to be fair,
which I think is a more official report, right?
Right.
I would say more rigorous.
I mean, to be fair, there's that 996 work culture, which is quite brutal.
Right, okay.
Right. Yeah,
okay. But interestingly, when you go back to the first report that we are talking about, the one put out by Remote, China placed 47th, 12 steps higher than Malaysia, right?
Are these both measuring roughly the same thing?
Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the point of this is that we always come across this kind of reports all the time. And for some reason, it seems to be happening more often. There's a lot more reports coming out that measure countries on a whole range of different indexes, right? And then Malaysia either goes up or goes down. For some reason, the trend seems to be in a lot of these reports that have been coming out, Malaysia has been falling in a number of spaces. I think recently there was also this competitiveness report, right? So Malaysia fell again, and there was a lot of hoo-ha about that.
Right.
But the reason I bring this up is because I think in line with what we try to do, which is really to shed light on things from an economic perspective, there's also something to be said about how reports are put together, right? And really is your sort of dissecting reports. And I feel where I come from is that naturally I understand why a lot of people picked up on this report. Many media outlets did. But I was kind of surprised that certain outlets that I think to be more reputable also picked up on this report. When you actually really look at it, right, the remote that put out this report, it was actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, from what I could gather, they are a startup in the work placement space, right? And you can imagine that someone in their PR team said, hey, how do we get our name out there? Let's put together a report, right?
Yeah.
And everyone sort of basically took on this report.
Right.
So they got what is called in the industry earned media, right? So basically they didn't have to pay for it. They put out a report, everyone talks about it, right? So it's basically free, right?
Yeah, organic marketing.
So great for them. I mean, I give them props for, strategically from a marketing and PR, very good. It's great. But what I want to get into is that this report, I think if you actually take the time to look into what they are measuring, I think there are a few things that we can really sort of question, right?
Right.
And so that is why I was mentioning that I understand a lot of people will just take it at face value,
right.
But I would have wished that certain outlets would have maybe looked a little bit deeper at what they were measuring.
I mean, sure.
But I mean, do you think this is a problem in general? I mean...
Okay, so just to think about it at a surface level, the first question that I had was, why is the last rank number 60? Sounds like a pretty arbitrary number, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure if you take the same metrics and you extend it, you will get a lot more countries on the list, and Malaysia will be somewhere in the middle, like the WHR.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course, if it's 100 companies, then we are, we are just about missed the top half, right?
So you're only second half if you put the cut-off point at 60, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I mean, to your question more directly, I'm an economist as well as a financial analyst, and we see this all the time, right? So maybe let's just stick to the policy side, economics as well as maybe a bit of politics. For instance, you may have followed a bit of news in the US political sphere right now.
Yep.
Quite a few reports of this nature are like that, where things are not perfectly communicated from the ground, right? And what I mean by that is they use a bit of I wouldn't say in a very intentional way, but they use a bit of their own discretion in terms of how to set the ranking, right? What are the inputs that go in? And at the end of the day, when you see the score, you don't really see how the score has arrived at.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about, as you mentioned, right, inputs, right? So, and hopefully as part of this episode, I also want to maybe talk about how, in a way, it's kind of easy to put something like this together, right? If you don't do the actual hard work of actually collecting the data, like surveys and stuff like that, a lot of data is already available. You can just sort of put certain data together in a basket, you come up with an index. Anyone can do it, right? So I went a little bit further, which seems like at least 2 steps, a little bit more effort than everyone else seemed to have put into it, right? So, and actually it wasn't even hard, it was just, it's right there. You can actually look at the index, they actually tell you like what are they measuring, right? So I give you 2 points of what they measure. Bear in mind, right, as I mentioned just now, I think when you talk about work-life balance, you're really trying to think about happiness, right? So with that in mind, one of the metrics they use is how much annual leave or statutory annual leave. And here you start seeing where the problem comes. So statutory annual leave.
Okay, so wait, just for the audience benefit, so this is one of the inputs that went into the ranking.
Or you can say sub-indexes. So there are sub-indexes that make up the index, right? Or okay, let's use inputs.
So maybe you can give me a bit more visualization. So how many sub-indexes were there?
I believe there were 6 or 7.
Okay.
And one of it was annual leave. One of it, of course, I think was minimum wage, right? Another one was, I'm not going to mention now, we're going to talk about it.
Okay, right.
Okay, let's just take a statutory annual leave, right? So statutory annual leave in Malaysia is 19 days.
Okay.
But you also know that all of us tend to believe that in Malaysia there are too many public holidays, right?
Okay.
Okay, and so that's
I
the
think
first problem.
most employees wouldn't agree with that, but
Okay,
go on.
but the business community will say that. And here's the thing, right? So public holidays is not annual leave.
Right.
Public holidays is public holidays. So because they only count annual leave, which is 19 days, we immediately are much lower compared to a lot of European countries that, they tend to take summers off, right? Almost a whole month, right?
Yes.
So that gives you a sense. But if you added in our public leave, right, public holidays, I think on that metric, at least we will be on par.
Would we? Would we really?
At least on that metric. So, if I'm not mistaken, New Zealand had almost 30 days of annual leave, right? So now if Malaysia has 19 days of annual leave and you add about, I think, 11 days of public holidays, so you see, right, it's almost close already, right?
Right.
Just on that line, that metric, right?
Okay.
But I think all this add up to the final score, right?
Right.
So my point is that it's really, to everyone out there who was referring to this study, I just want to make the point that there's always a lot more to it, right?
Yes.
But I also want to, before I'm accused of being apologetic, the state and the country, let me also acknowledge it is true that we do not have a good work-life balance. There's a lot of other data that sort of justifies that, right?
Right.
But for now, I just want to talk about this particular report and how it's put together.
Okay.
Right? And true enough, when I looked up just public holidays, Malaysia is the places 8th in terms of worldwide, the country with the highest number of public holidays. Right? So we're in the top 10 when it comes to public holidays. But public holidays is different from annual leave.
Right.
So therefore, again, it's sort of distorted. Right?
But maybe just for benefit of audience, if you were to add their public holidays to their annual leave, would they still be higher?
Probably slightly higher, I give that. But you also know that a lot of Western countries, they don't have much public holidays. They have bank holidays.
Yes.
It's just a few in a year, I think. And of course, like major, Christmas and stuff like that.
Right.
So they would be slightly higher. But the point is that a significant amount of our holidays, which basically the idea here is that if you can have a break, then you're not working, you can enjoy life, right? That is the core idea here, right? So if you don't account for the public holidays, then of course there's a penalty. My point is that we are not going to be in the top 10 or top 20, but we probably will not be on 59.
Right. Okay.
All right?
Sure.
The second one I want to show you, and this one is going to be a lot more interesting. Another measure that they used was what they call LGBTQ plus inclusivity.
Okay, sorry. Are they coming out with these measurements themselves?
No.
Or they're using someone else's?
They're using existing data, which we'll talk about a little bit more as well, right?
Sure.
But so there's LGBTQ plus inclusivity. So this one, all I'll say about this is that anyone who was angry about this report, about where Malaysia stood, if we became inclusive, we would automatically be a higher place, right?
Right.
So you pick what you want to be happy or unhappy about.
Right. Basically what you're saying is that there's room for discretion here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the ranking is not what it may appear to be on the surface.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I think my issue here is how easy it is for people to put indexes together. Right. Anyone can do it. And actually, the effort is not as much as what people might think.
Right.
And so just to give you an example, right, let's do a thought experiment. Okay, so we are Economy Rise. Let's just come up with a random index of our own. Let's call it the Digital Economy Rise Index.
Okay.
So what is the Digital Economy Rise Index? So here's the thing, right? On the fly, I can just design this, right? So to me, I would argue that the Digital Economy Rise Index is an index to understand which state, in particular in Malaysia, has the highest number of online orders for Economy Rise.
Right.
Okay. I mean, it's let's have fun with it, right?
An arbitrary.
Okay. So this is the index, Digital Economy Rise Index.
Right.
So what would you do to create this index? You would actually, as you mentioned, right, inputs, right? So you would make certain assumptions on inputs.
Yes.
Because you're working with digital online ordering. The first input is reasonably, you can say you will look at broadband penetration.
Okay.
Right? Or really mobile penetration in different states, right?
Right.
Because without that, you can't really do online orders, right? Okay. Secondly, you could scrape Google. So a lot of every time we want to go to a place, we search on Google, right, to see the rankings and stuff like that.
Right.
So you could put in into Google like a Chup Fund in specific locations. You get a sense of how many Chup Fund places are there in that locality or in that state, right?
Yes.
And then you can also get some data in terms of across different states, how much the comparison in terms of online ordering or sort of e-commerce, right?
Yes.
Okay, so all of this you put in, you make certain assumptions, you give it different weightage, and you sort of get an index, right?
Yes.
And all of this is really, a lot of the data is probably readily available. The work is actually maybe finding it. But coming back to this report, things like GDP, things like annual leave, things like minimum wage is all very easily available, right? So you just find all this data, you decide what you want to put in a basket,
Right.
which serves your purpose, your narrative, and then boom, you have an index. It really is that easy, right?
Yeah.
So the methodology is, I think, questionable.
Right.
But as I mentioned, it's strategically, I give them props. They got a lot of earned media. Good for them. But I was really kind of surprised that certain titles, certain like media outlets took this up and sort of gave it more spotlight than warranted. Right?
Okay.
Right. So I was quite surprised by that, actually, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I mean, just going back to your point about how search indexes can be imperfect, right? So I think as an economist, one thing I always see people misunderstanding is inflation data. So for instance, CPI, right? If you are trying to figure out future inflation trajectory, it's really a lot more complicated than just looking at the headline data, for instance.
Yeah.
Right? For instance, the weighting of the components that go into the basket, there are something called hedonic adjustments, which is basically
The depreciation and all that.
yes, right. Just adjusting it for a more apples to apples comparison over time. And without actually looking into all these data, the headline data is almost useless for insight. You might as well just not use it,
Yeah.
So these kind of things are actually quite common.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, let's just stick to economics because it's not so sensitive, right? Something like inflation. I can tell you, right, that whatever you hear on CNBC or Bloomberg, as much as it is credible, it's really not very helpful for predicting what next year's inflation is going to look like. There's just too many other factors. I actually recently read a report about someone who actually broke down all the factors. I can tell you, it is nothing like what you hear on the news. Right? So I think this kind of phenomenon where there is kind of a funnel component, right, where people only hear what's on the surface, right? They don't really hear what all the work that's really done. It's actually quite a common phenomenon. And it's also a little bit of I wouldn't say a warning, but a little bit of a red flag, right? That if you are only relying on data that you hear, everyone hears about, it may not even be accurate,
So thank God for Economy Rise, right?
Yes, right.
Podcast.
I mean, one of the things that we are trying to do is really just to bring people closer to the truth.
So again, I just want to state we are not questioning Malaysia's work-life balance issue. That issue is real, and we have actually covered this, and we will talk about it shortly again in terms of what we can do. But this report I think was not worth the news cycle that it got. I'm really surprised that like even BFM picked this up. It's like I would expect that they would know better in terms of going down and understanding the background to this report lah. So okay. So let's move on to the third part.
I'm Aaron.
And I'm Hardish. And this is the Economy Rise podcast.
It's where we focus on things related to the economy and things that are related to your rice bowl. So if you're enjoying this kind of content, please like and follow and subscribe to our channel for the economist in you. Okay, Hardish, we're back.
So thinking about this, right? Coming back to just this idea of work-life balance, and really thinking about this further, because I think this warrants really looking at. It feels to me that the issue is that in fact Malaysians can't afford to be happy, and that's kind of sad in a way, right? And the reason I say that, what the sort of how I justify it is that if you go back to our previous episode where we looked at the KRI report, right? The Khazanah Research Institute report. So we looked at a number of different data that they shared. But one of the things that stood out to me was, 70% of our households, right, are spending their income on just meeting the very basic needs.
Right.
Right. We talked about that at length. But
so
for
context, the monthly household income per pax is something like 2,900 ringgit. Is it correct?
I need to double check again.
It was around there, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But the idea is that as a household, right, you're sort of earning, you go to work and all that, and every dollar that you're getting in terms of your earning capacity,
right,
you are spending it on just getting by, right, meeting
on
your very basic need.
Yeah.
So you look at that, it means simply that there is no capacity to sort of enjoy life.
Right.
I mean, because if all your money is being spent on just meeting basic needs, then how are you going to allocate to sort of leisure, right?
Yes.
Simple leisure, simple pleasures and stuff like that. And that's really, I think, quite sad in a way when you think about it. So yes, Malaysia, I think generally there is a very low work-life balance.
Right.
We hear about it, even among friends and among peers, a lot of people say this, right? So that is from an economic point of view, right? It does lend credence to the idea that we don't have work-life balance, and hence, when this kind of headlines come out, I think people tap onto it because
it resonates with them. Right?
Yeah, it resonates with them, and it's an outlet, right?
So maybe you can tell us in the comments whether you feel that you have work-life balance or not.
Yeah. So if you do, then based on the data, it means that you're in the top 30% of households.
T30 on the WLB index.
Because only 30% of households can spend on aspirational goods and services.
Right.
That's what the report said. So like this really got me thinking, like if that's the case, like what can be done to move the needle when it comes to work-life balance? So, okay, besides this engineering stuff, like when you look at this particular report, the remote report, where, if you accounted for our annual leave, we probably will score a bit higher. If we became a lot more inclusive to people that we deem to be other than us, right? We could be higher as well, right? But like what else can be done? Like really practical solutions. And one thing that stood out to me is there was another report that was put out by it was called The Future of Work in Malaysia.
Okay.
And one of the things that came up here is that 55% of workers prefer hybrid work, right? And I think, of course, we know where that comes from. A lot of people had this experience when it came to the pandemic.
So let me ask you a question. Yeah. Do you think that 100% of workers prefer hybrid work?
Okay, so let me rephrase that. Who are these 45 people who don't prefer hybrid work, right? Meaning that
are they
presumably
the
they prefer, yeah, probably.
Yeah, right. It's right? The ones who want
people who like, oh man, I can't get my stuff done if I don't have my people around me.
But are there 45% of the working population being managers?
Maybe it's also the other way around. 45% out of that 45%, some of them want fully work at home, right? So that's not hybrid as well.
No, maybe we actually need to question this number.
Okay, we can.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But this feels like a low-hanging fruit, right?
Right.
The idea is that if you want to think about work-life happiness or work-life balance, it's very easy to imagine that as a worker, right, if you can be given some flexibility, and then if you ask in a survey, chances are you're going to answer a bit more positively, right, to this kind of surveys in terms of measuring work-life balance, because you get to have a little bit of freedom over your sort of work and life arrangements, right? Especially if you have kids, you need to manage stuff like that, you need flexibility. So this is like, as I say, a low-hanging fruit. And the only reason I can think why more companies are not doing this is because we have very old-fashioned bosses, right?
I mean, to be fair, I don't see very good work-life balance even in the US. Right? Like only Europe really has
Europe, definitely.
Like reputable work-life balance.
Yeah. So I think it's a lot of old-fashioned bosses who think that there's only one way of getting work done, which is having everybody literally trapped in a particular office building, right, where you can view them all the time. You can literally, have hover over their shoulders, right, to see them working. And the other thing is that I feel that a lot of these companies, right, they spend so much money on building building their offices and stuff like that they now feel that, I need to get my money's worth back. Everybody has to come and work in the office, right?
But as a businessman yourself, do you hear this sentiment commonly?
I hear it among my friends who work for people.
Right, but how about
we are
among the decision makers?
So I would say for me it's slightly different because a lot of people I work with are more in the startup community, and they tend to be a lot more flexible. Right. In fact, so it's kind of different because for them every dollar counts.
Yes.
So if they can save on office rental, they will, right? So that also explains why there's so much of co-working spaces have been booming lately. But I don't think that is really reflective of the majority of employees in this country. I think most of them work for very traditional kind of businesses, right? Who have really nice, fancy, spanky buildings with their name on it. And they want everybody to travel, commute to work, regardless of how stressful the commute is and how much time they have to spend in traffic. But my point is that is one easy way, right?
Yes.
You immediately can address that.
No, I came across a recent news article by Dell. Do you remember Dell?
Yeah.
So Dell is in the news recently because they are helping NVIDIA build some AI stuff, right? And they actually implemented a policy which was quite interesting, which relates to work-life balance. So what they did was they told people who wanted to work at home, you can opt to not come in the office, but you need to forgo promotions.
Whoa.
Right. So
is that legal?
It's voluntary, so you probably have to sign everything, right?
Wow.
It's not forced on you. And I think it does help align the incentives of those who actually prefer to do that, as well as the cost of the company. Because if you think about it from a purely economist point of view, one thing about employees is that they tend to represent sticky costs, because employees tend to be quite resistant to reducing their salaries. At the same time, if a company has to reduce the cost, they tend to have to let you go. It's a all or nothing kind of thing. So it doesn't really do the supply and demand adjustments in the economy as needed. In the same way, houses also don't.
Yeah.
And this is a problem from an economist's point of view, because you are not allowing the free market to, or the invisible hand, to really adjust demand and supply across the economy as required. You have a little bit of price control involved.
Yeah.
And what Dell is doing is basically letting the employees choose to reduce their wages effectively that can then be reallocated to more optimal areas for the business. Because keep in mind, right, the alternative is not a better scenario for the employee.
Yeah.
The alternative is if the business cannot hold on to you, they will let you go.
Yeah.
So this does sound like a little bit of value creation. Do you think that would work practically as a work-life balance issue? Going back to your earlier question.
The point is that, unfortunately, from the viewpoint of the employee, right, the signal that something like this, a policy like this gives me is that in order for me to have a higher quality of life, I have to be willing to forego certain perks, right? And in this case, it's promotion, right? So
okay, so maybe I can give a bit of context. So think about a new father.
Yeah.
Right, who maybe gets like 5 hours of sleep a day. He may be
probably a new mother rather than a father.
I think fathers as well, right?
Okay. Modern fathers.
Right. So, in those kinds of, or maybe you have a sick family member, or maybe your dog just died.
Yeah.
Right. You may want that time to, just stabilize and get steady, and maybe promotions are not on top of your mind.
Yeah.
And you also don't want to be seen as lazy. Of course, we can talk about all the practical consequences of it, but from an economics point of view, right, it seems like an efficient way to do information transfer. And since it's at the discretion of the employee, it doesn't really increase the risk of an employee. Employer is not forcing an employee to do anything. They can accept the status quo, or they can accept the step back if the trade-offs are worth it. Right? It's purely within the employee's control. So from a risk management point of view, it does seem to improve the cost-benefit equation, right? And for those who want it, for instance, the new dad, could that be a appropriate way to address work-life balance?
My argument will still be no. And my argument actually is it's also not in the interest of the employer to do this.
Right.
And the reason is very quickly, right? I guess this is maybe diverging a little bit, but The reason is because I'm signaling to someone that potentially could be a real asset to me that actually you just need to do the bare minimum to get your salary, right? I'm not encouraging them to take their career progression seriously, which actually could benefit me as well, right? If they are like a star employee or potential star employee, right? You will never be able to get that out of them. But yeah, I think it's not a perfect answer.
Right.
But I think there are some repercussions even for their employer as well that maybe they're not considering.
Okay. Sure. But if Dell has done it, I mean, Dell is a pretty big company.
Is this quite recent?
Yeah. It was like last month, if I'm not wrong.
Okay. So that means it's kind of you could say it's a pilot in a way.
Probably.
So we don't really know how effective it is, right?
Right.
Okay. Maybe we can come back to this.
In a different episode.
Like
and subscribe.
But my last point I want to make on this is, so I mentioned one of it, the low-hanging fruit was like hybrid work, right?
Right.
The other one is, I won't qualify this as low-hanging fruit because it's not as easy. But essentially what it really comes down to, which is a theme that we've been covering across many, many episodes, is basically you just got to, it's higher wages, right?
Right.
Now, of course, I understand this is slightly harder, but the context for this, again, I want to point out, is that when you look at what we've covered in the past, again, from the same KRI report, where starting salaries have not moved at all, practically have not moved in the past 10 years, right? So you understand that why people really cannot afford.
Yes.
And I just want to stress that, right? It's not about, this is really a huge structural issue. Like people cannot even afford to be happy, and that's is very, very unfortunate, right? To argue that point, you know how a lot of people always say money can't buy happiness?
Right.
If you look at it from this point of view, my argument is that if you pay people more, actually you can buy happiness, right? People earn a little bit more, they will be happier, right? Because they will probably have less financial pressures, they have less to sort of cloud their or rather take up so much of their stress in terms of making ends meet, right? Yeah, you pay people more, they become happier in the hopes that they become more productive. So money can in fact buy happiness from this point of view. Yeah, I don't know if you agree with that.
I actually did come across a very interesting report last month.
Right.
And to be clear, this is an article based on a pretty old research.
Okay.
So basically the idea is that I think about 10 years ago, there was a report saying that the optimal annual salary is something like 75,000.
Yes.
You seem to recall, right?
I've seen the report.
And then there was an update to it by someone else about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Where he said that, again, the measurements were not accurate.
This is 75,000 USD.
Yes. The first report came out in 2012, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then I think about 2 or 3 years ago, another report came out where someone updated it and basically argued that the measurements were not correct. The first guy and the second guy co-worked on a new paper.
Okay.
Right? Which reframed it to about 160,000.
Okay.
Right? 120 to 160,000. What their conclusion is to address what you were saying. Can money buy happiness or not?
Yeah.
And what they concluded was that money can't buy happiness, but it can remove unhappiness. Okay. So what do I mean by that? What do they mean by that? Right?
Money can't buy happiness, but can remove unhappiness. Okay.
Because once you get to the roughly $120,000 threshold, you are more or less steady financially, right?
Yeah.
And you can stop worrying. Beyond that, what increases happiness is not money anymore, right? So just to digress, they compared the 120,000 guy to the guy earning 600,000, and the curve was like that, diminishing returns.
Right.
So the idea is yes, right? Very, very much plateaus, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that the things that can give you happiness above that 120,000 threshold are things like respect, things like love, right?
Okay.
There are more qualitative things which are not financially related.
Right.
But where money does, increase happiness is really that.
Or reduce unhappiness.
Right. It removes unhappiness because when you don't have enough money, you are stressed.
Yeah.
So it helps to remove the stress.
Yeah.
But I think the way they describe it is quite correct, right?
Yeah,
because once you hit 120,000 a year, you don't really need to remove any more stress, like strictly speaking.
Yeah.
Right? You can basically coast, right?
Yeah.
And in order to increase it further, you need other things, which is not money.
Okay. No, I think on that note, right, if I could summarize this episode, we started with this particular report, right? and all the chatter online, I think we can summarize that Malaysians are relatively unhappy. Right?
Okay.
Right?
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, because that's how you read this a low work life index, right?
Right.
No matter how you measure it, really means that you are unhappy, right? Or you're sort of stressed, right? Which leads to unhappiness.
Right.
So on the point that number one, a lot of people were talking about this, which I think is an indicator of when people talk about this or share this and all that, it's also an indicator that they probably feel the same way, right?
Right.
So I think Malaysians are very unhappy with their work-life balance.
So what do you think can be done about this? Okay, to be fair, right? I think most countries are also the same, right?
Yes. This is a global problem.
It's an economist problem.
Well, you know what I'm going to say? To me, it's just give people money, but that's a whole different. Whole different.
Okay,
episode.
so maybe we can make it as another episode. But let me just get your thoughts on it as a businessman.
Yeah.
Do you think that's realistic to ask employers to pay more?
Okay, I will talk from my experience.
Right.
Bear in mind, my experience is limited to the biggest size of workforce I had under me was about 20 people.
Right.
And,
no, that's substantial.
Yeah, and I will never go back to that.
Right.
Because I'm reminded of the payroll every month, right? The amount, right? Okay, I do not want that stress anymore. But I will tell you this: what I've learned since then is the Pareto principle plays here as well. 20% of the people do 80% of the work, right?
Right.
And the lesson I learned belatedly was that if I just found out of that 20 people, if I found like the 5 or 6 who are really, really good and they did exist and paid them double their salary,
right,
I would still be better off.
Okay, but here's the thing. Is that even practically implementable? Can you really, reduce the workforce as a practical matter? Maybe even with hindsight?
Yeah.
And get the double the output by paying them double? Does that even work as a realistic concept?
I don't think it works for large companies, right? Because it'll be very complicated. But even then, actually, they do try. I mean, all these voluntary separation schemes, right? Actually, that is what it is, right?
Right.
They're trying to trim. And look, let's face it, as much as I am on the side of employees, there is also productivity issues in any big company, right?
Yes.
Not everyone pulls equal weight, right? So I will give that to employers as well.
Right.
So I understand sometimes why there are VSS, because they need to trim, or rather remove those who are not being productive. And a lot of this becomes very emotional driven, right? This sort of debates. But from an economic point of view, it is a viable it is a viable tool, right? And in fact, I believe some companies do this as a matter of policy. Every year, they commit to firing certain number of people because they just want to make sure that they have the best performing, right? So they literally will find, okay, we have a KPI of how many people we need to let go. Too bad, you just fall below the line, you're out.
The rank system.
Right. So and it can be quite brutal.
Yes.
But we also have to look at it from the productivity point of view. Well, okay, let me put it this way. The government is definitely trying to address this, right? Minimum wage has been raised a few times. I think they're going to try, now it's progressive wage, right? So this is all sort of policies that the government is trying to increase the money that people have, that hopefully will make them less unhappy. Right. But it's a tricky issue. There's no easy fix to this.
Yeah, there is a scarce amount of room that you can go in through.
Yeah. Okay, you want to close the episode? I'll let you have the last argument.
So just to give my own thoughts as an economist, keeping in mind that I'm not taking into account the individual's consideration at this argument, I think that at the end of the day, it's about figuring out which trade-off you make. And I'm going to propose something very creative. So if you think about why most employees stress about losing their work, right, their jobs, it's because of the mortgage payment, right? That's substantially most of what you are worried about. If you did not have a mortgage, you lose your job, it's not great, but you will worry 50% less, right? So obviously my suggestion wouldn't work 20 years ago because there is definitely a social contract in society between the employer and the mortgage payment of the employee. But this we may cover in a future episode. Today, house prices across the world are all way too expensive, as evidenced by very, very low rental yields, below even treasury yields sometimes. And the argument I'm trying to make is that if house prices are too high and they are no longer a viable investment, is it something we can forego in favor of something better? And if
Such
so,
as?
I mean, I don't have something off the top of my mind, right? But I'm just saying that perhaps it's time to reconsider the mortgage payment, right? That social contract between your job and the mortgage payment. And if that is the case, there could be an argument to be made that if the employee doesn't have to worry about the mortgage payment, could that stress energy be reallocated somehow? Right? For instance, losing a job with 50% less stress and making you ask, or maybe you might even ask for more work-life balance because you're just renting, right? Given that we are already having our back against the wall with regards to this matter, could we make a trade-off on overvalued house prices, which, let's be clear, is probably not going to repeat the past 40 years of house appreciation, and find a better way, right? If you are giving a trade-off somewhere, there might be room for some other stuff, right? Compared to if you are trying to maintain the status quo, clearly everyone is already with their back towards the wall. So that's something I think our policymakers can think about from an economy standpoint, right? I believe even a few presidents recently and prime ministers have said something to the effect of, let's stop encouraging the obsession with home ownership. Maybe the new generation needs something.
So that's the episode. My summary is not all reports are equal.
Right.
Right? There are some that are better than others. Maybe you don't want to just take it at face value. But of course, okay. Of course you would, right? Because you have 100 other things to worry about on top of having your backs against the wall and meeting your mortgages. Right. So we will do the heavy lifting for you. And that's what we've tried to do. This particular report, I would say honestly, with respect to the publishers, you can kind of trash it. But other reports of significance, like the World Happiness Report, and I think that one gives a much better gauge of where we are in terms of our work-life balance, which still also says that there's some ways to go.
Right. I think in a future episode, we'll be doing one about gender equality as well.
Yes.
So
coming up.
Look forward to that.
Cool. So that was this week's episode. And follow us, subscribe, and tune in to the next episode as well.
We'll see you in the next episode.